this was. The glacier, the ice, is covered in rock and debris. This is the remnants of the slide. At the end of this video, because I want to impress upon you just how large an event this was. The end of this video, because I want to impress upon you just how large an event this was. The glacier, the ice, is covered in rock and debris. This is the remnants of the slide.
Guys, in order for you to understand what just happened here, I have to remind you of Bloodden. If you see the pictures of Bloodden, that massive landslide that buried the village and the valley, but what happened here is it has buried the ocean. You hear me right? The water is gone. And it has covered a glacier. Sounds familiar? Bloodden collapses on the glacier and then the glacier collapses. The water is gone. This landslide is so massive, it has filled a fjord. Bloodden is a teeny tiny crumble of the cake compared to this one, guys. And we will hear more of it in the next days, I am sure. But this is a monstrosity of a spectacle of nature, including the monstrosity of Tsunami, 100 feet, that it has created, guys. Everything you need to see. There's videos, there's flyover videos, there's interviews and pictures, everything now.
Debris.
Pure chaos out of nowhere. Sasha Calvi awoke to a war. Sleeping in a tent, hiking, taking a time out to relax.
So I went to my family doctor and he said, oh, you got Peyronie's. Just very mad.
What's really mind-blowing to me as the camera here pans away from the glacier and you look into the fjord, it's a little hard to see, but all of this is supposed to be water. Instead, it appears that this whole bay has been filled in with wet rock debris.
Pure chaos out of nowhere. Sasha Calvi awoke to a roar. Sleeping in a tent, hiking, taking a time out to relax. But then he said, I look out of the tent and then I can see a massive wave coming towards me, like inches away, he said. He was camping with two friends, Billy White and Nick Hallgeist, on Harbor Island. That's an uninhabited islet in Holcomb Bay, Alaska. It's at the convergence of two of Southeast Alaska's most visited fjords, Tracey Arm and Endicott Arm. So the three guys had spent the past 78 days kayaking the Inside Passage from Washington. Kayaking in fjords like this, when you see the steep slopes, gee, at least my viewers here on the channel know that we should not do that. A lot can happen. Maybe you have seen my Akernes mountain video. If not, you should. But let's hear that story, guys. This story goes further along.
To me, the most compelling evidence for just how massive this slide is that here where in the fjord, what you see is you actually see rock debris side to side spanning the whole fjord far into the distance where water used to be. That's stunning to me.
So the three hoped to spend their final 2 weeks of their trip making their way to Glacier Bay. But then, at 5:45 a.m., their plans abruptly changed. Absolutely changed. Calvi, when he woke up and saw what was happening, he scrambled to wake up his friends. And the three are not some normal tourists. They're all professional guides who have been taking a summer off from leading trips through the San Juan Islands in Washington. So they had pitched, you see it on the picture, their tent in the woods far away from the high tide line, because they knew if the tide comes in, you better not be camping there and sleeping. But what they saw when they got out of their tents, they emerged to find much of their gear had vanished, swept away by the rush of water. Calvi's kayak was floating a quarter mile offshore. White's was resting on a cliff. And Halgeis was in a tree. The kayak was in a tree, guys. So they said, quote, it was just pure chaos out of nowhere. All of it, all our gear was just gone. Experienced guides and people, they feel when something is really different and wrong. And that's what they said they felt immediately. So miles away, anchored near the entrance of a fjord that is known as Fjord's Terror. That doesn't sound good. That implicates something's bad here. Another person, Christina Smith, saw water moving backwards, retreating. If we see water retreating, guys, I mean, at least since 2004, everyone should know what that means. The Boxing Day tsunami. So Christina Smith, she knew the area very well, and she'd been taking clients there aboard her small cruise ship, the David B, to do some exploration cruises. And she's been doing that for nearly 2 decades. So she really knows the water, she knows the tides, she knows the area. But when she saw the tide quickly rise and then fall roughly 10 feet over 3 meters, she knew something was off. And she said, quote, when we started seeing the water rising again on what should have been a falling tide, low tide, we knew something was really, really different and wrong. So she reached out to a seismologist she knew. She was asking, was there an earthquake? Like we just had the megathrust earthquake 8.8 in Kamchatka that triggered a tsunami all across the Pacific Ring of Fire. Of course that comes to your mind. Earthquake, tsunami. So the seismologist that she consulted didn't know anything at first, and then consulted with colleagues at the Alaska Earthquake Center and the USGS, the US Geological Survey. So she basically alerted them. She was on to something, that's for sure, and seismometers across North America had rattled indeed just a few minutes before.
If you look up on the mountainside here, you can see the whole scar where literally the entire side of the mountain collapsed. So the rock fell near the end of the glacier, give it a second here, leaving just a big jumbled pile of rock chunks and icebergs all mixed together.
But what were these waves? After a while, the Alaska State seismologist Michael West said, quote, honestly, I think of it as the side of a mountain collapsing. Mountain collapse / landslide, rock slide, something like this. Can be over water, but also underwater. So in the immediate aftermath of this tsunami, the remote landslide, the origin, the location was uncertain. But West said early indications were that it must have been a truly impressive amount of rock and debris that was tumbling down. Tens of hundreds of millions of cubic meters. Remember Bluton, when that came down, how quickly that came down and how massive that came down. And Bluton was way less debris and material. And now think about, you throw this material in a bathtub, that creates a tsunami. And in narrow fjords, the waves quickly reach one side and then get pushed away from that side to the other one. So they're accelerating themselves. These fjords are really, really dangerous. But of course, remote areas, nobody filmed it. But it must have been, according to the scientists, a colossal tsunami.
We have all sorts of analogies for talking about the size of landslides, tens of thousands of Olympic-sized swimming pools, or a cube of rock, several football fields on a side. But what's really mind-blowing to me, as the camera here pans away from the glacier and you look into the fjord, it's a little hard to see, but all of this is supposed to be water.
And we know, I have reported about this, Southeast Alaska has seen a growing number of unfortunately fatal landslides near populated areas when they come out of nowhere as a surprise, especially in recent years. But the landslide that we're talking about right now is something quite a bit different. It's rather than a top layer of soil that's giving away in this case, it seems that
businesses everywhere are turning to Gusto for payroll, benefits, and more. Save time. Save money. It's no wonder Gusto was named Tech Republic's best payroll software. Get started for free at gusto.com.
You keep the things you love running smoothly for the long haul. That's why he's been on Adequan Canine since he was diagnosed with osteoarthritis. Available by prescription, it's the only FDA-approved drug proven to proactively treat osteoarthritis. Adequan Canine treats the disease, not just the signs, helping slow its progression now to protect mobility down the road. Learn the early signs of osteoarthritis and ask your veterinarian if Adequan Canine is right for your dog.
Large masses of bedrock came down. And when all that rock fell near the end of Tracey Arm, where the South Sawyer Glacier reaches tidewater, West says it set off a truly colossal tsunami. Unfortunately, we don't have pictures of this, but we can see the aftermath. We can still see the water that's different and what's floating in the water. And we see it on the edges of the fjord. So if we look at the picture that was taken by Heilgeist, when all that rock fell, and then the water was rising, that tsunami was hitting the shorelines, it was destroying vegetation. So that's why on this picture here, you see that edge, the rock, and then the trees are starting. This was a treed area. This has all been destroyed by the tsunami, and this gives you an indication how high the waters reached. And then you see on the right side of this picture, one lonely tree survived on that other part. So this photo was taken after the three guys were rescued by a charter yacht and shows this island deep in the fjord scoured almost of all vegetation, just a lone tree. So they're still figuring out to get better height estimates for this tsunami, but it was pretty clear, and it is pretty clear that it was at least 100 feet tall in some areas near the source. 100 feet, that's 30 meters. That's what West said. Guys, this is massive. This is what everyone's afraid of here on the West Coast when the megathrust earthquake hits the Cascadia Fault, that within 8 to 15 minutes we will see a massive tsunami like that. And then in these narrow fjords especially, the wave continued to resonate for hours. But even after the Kamchatka earthquake, when it was spreading over the Pacific, it was resonating from one side sent to the other side. So water was rising in areas for quite a while, wave after wave. And also here, the scientist uses my example. No, he says it's like water sloshing in a bathtub. It even, that tells you how massive it was, it showed up in a tide gauge in Juneau. That is 75 miles, that's over 110 kilometers north, and around quite a few corners. And fluctuations of a foot or so evident several times in the hours after the landslide. Several times. This resonates, this sloshing in a bathtub phenomenon. So the captain, Smith, she said she saw downed trees and scoured shorelines as her boat, the David B., made its way up to Tracey Arm just a few days ago after the incident. Other tour guides, they had to turn their boats around. They didn't do any trips on the fjord because everything was full of debris. Ice floating around, trees floating around. Scientists are still trying to put together what exactly has happened, but they have a pretty good picture of what was happening. And he said, expert scientists around the world are now studying this quite rare and massive geological event, because fjords do not only exist in Alaska or British Columbia. We're thinking about Norway, for example. Again, a Cairns mountain, if that thing comes down, guys, that will be devastating. They have even made a movie about this. So link is, no, not link. Oh yeah, you just have to click the end screen after this video. That's where I put it. So everyone wants to study this, and they say, we will study this for years to come. And the scientists are comparing this landslide, and this shows you how massive this is, to a 630-foot tsunami that struck the Tan Fjord. 630 feet. That's crazy. That's an area, that's an arm of Icy Bay that's roughly 65 miles northwest of Yakutat. In 2015, and it's not long ago. And they're saying that the slide we're talking about right now was even substantially larger than a landslide and tsunami that struck in the Kenai Fjords National Park last year. So it is really substantial. And here it becomes interesting again. West has spotlighted one early, intriguing piece of evidence. A series of small tremors before the bigger slide. You see the tremors here. He said it's modest earthquakes, but hundreds or thousands of very small ones. Like the mountain was breaking apart and was sending these tremors. This is how massive this was. He said this landslide had a very clear precursory sequence. And that is not something we have observed very often. Very, very rare that it makes such a roar. Gives you a warning, I would say. Maybe they learn from that, right? If their seismographs catch something like this next time, well, better look. And also what the scientists are saying, that people in Alaska were lucky that the slide was happening when it did. It was early in the morning, around 5:30 a.m. local time, so there weren't no tour boats or cruise ships in the fjord when the masses of rock fell. Because if you're in that fjord when it starts the bathtub effect, you don't want to be on a boat. Very, very dangerous. And also that's what West is saying. It's hard to imagine that in front of the landslide itself that anything would survive. So they were lucky. But, here comes the but, the scientists are also warning. Tsunamis like this won't always be in remote places. They can also be in places with more dense populated areas. Click the end screen, Cairns Mountain. So West said the incidents give scientists a chance to learn more about how massive landslides like this happen and the havoc they can wreak. Because now, once you collect the data, you can transfer that to another fjord that is more densely populated and can give estimates where the water will go, how high it will go, and which areas are under direct threat. Because if it comes down there, you don't have almost no time to evacuate. The tsunami is immediately. Sit in your bathtub, guys. Have one leg out, depending on how much leg you have. Put it in the bathtub immediately, and then you'll see what happens. No time to evacuate. So the scientists are saying we are in a rare position of being able to have these events that thankfully don't have catastrophic impacts right now, because sometimes we can tuck them away in remote places, but if they're not in remote places, what they can do then will be catastrophic. Right now, this landslide presents a phenomenal opportunity to learn and better understand how these things work, so that when he says in Whittier or Sword or Hunat or Elfinkov or whatever else, we're better prepared for that. In Norway and also in Alaska, they do map some mountains where you can see the cracks, where you think if that thing comes down, they do have measuring stations that measure the motions. They also do on Akernes Mountain, because this is this is just astronomically huge. And for the kayakers that I mentioned at the beginning, they were super lucky that they were not in their kayaks when it happened. That would have been it for them, absolutely. And interesting is that one of the guys, he said, well, this episode is a reminder for us that sometimes stuff just happens. Yeah, stuff. Catastrophe is the better word. So they were rescued by a charter yacht. The yacht is called the Blackwood. They heard their distress call on a marine radio. It's like, mayday, mayday, we're sitting on an island. Our boats, our little kayaks are up in the trees or on a rock. It sounds crazy, right? They had to fight quite strong currents when they loaded the kayakers, because everything was still shifting and moving and going on. Even tsunamis have these like aftershocks. We call it in an earthquake aftershocks, the after tsunamis. So they were lucky. They could, what they had left of their belongings, they could load that on the boat. They were welcomed with blankets, hot showers. And the boat even took them up Tracey Arm to see the damage that the tsunami had left behind. That's why we're seeing these pictures. And the one with the one tree, that's